يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وكونوا مع الصادقين.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh und herzlich willkommen mal wieder zum Ibn Thabit Verlag. Ich bin Dr. Steph Geis und ich habe heute mit mir Yasser und einen ganz, ganz besonderen Gast, Mr. Middlepath, der uns sich gleich vorstellen wird. Also erst einmal geht es heute um was ganz Spezielles, um etwas, was sehr modern ist, was sehr stark mit unserer heutigen Zeit zu tun hat. Und wir werden direkt mit ihm anfangen. Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Mr. Middlepath, Ahmed, brother, how are you doing, Akhi?
Alhamdulillah, wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you guys doing?
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair for accepting our invitation. Thank you for being there. First of all, give us an idea. I pretend I have no idea who you are. Suddenly I see the name Mr. Middlepath. Who is this man? What is this man talking about? And he has a beautiful beard, by the way. So next to the beautiful beard,
so do you.
Please introduce yourself to us. Let us know who you are. Bismillah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. So my name is Ahmed. I go by the YouTube name Mr. Middlepath. I've been in the field of psychology now for a long time. I'm currently a teacher. But in the past, I used to work in a psychiatric hospital in Egypt. I've worked in the psychology field for quite some time now. And I've also done a lot of research on drug culture, the psychedelic movement. And most of my YouTube channel focuses on self-development from an Islamic point of view. Although lately my focus has been on the drug culture and the psychedelic movement because of how it's influencing or affecting Muslims right now and how some Muslims are being confused about it. So I decided to start making videos on it. And here we are, a couple of years later, still making videos, alhamdulillah.
First of all, I think you yourself are a revert to the deen. Is this correct?
No, I'm half Egyptian, half American, right?
Okay.
And I was born Muslim. So I was born in Egypt, actually, but I've lived in America most of my life. I went to a Muslim school in America for a long time. And I worked in America, and then I moved back to Egypt. I worked there, and then I moved back to America. And then who knows, maybe in a few years I'll do hijrah again. We'll see.
Inshallah. May Allah make it easy for all of us.
Ameen.
This is a big topic, subhanAllah. But yeah, question number one, basically. I mean, you mentioned psychedelics and all this stuff here. What is this new age spiritualism that we see nowadays? We see that youngsters are drawn to it. And I'm talking about Muslims as well, non-Muslims as well as Muslims. And this is something that I think, subhanAllah, I mean, after I watched the first video that you put out there, and I saw a Muslim being busy with something like that, which I think is extremely important for us nowadays, living in the West even more so. How do you, how do we understand this? What is New Age spiritualism? What does a Muslim take out of that? What about our children, the youngsters who are into that stuff, non-Muslims and Muslims alike? What can we do with it? If you can give us an idea.
So New Age movement would probably start around the counterculture of the 70s. That's when it kind of started taking up steam. And the New Age movement is part of a wider movement in the West of man becoming his own God, right? Or man choosing his own destiny away from religion. And New Age movement doesn't have any specific definitions. It's kind of a broad term. So some people who are Christian might practice some New Age spirituality. Some people who are atheists might practice New Age spirituality. Or some people who are not sure about their religion might practice New Age spirituality. And the idea being is that me as a human, I can pick and choose what's good for me. Right, what's good for me, everyone is on their own personal journey. So it has a type of perennialist philosophy wherein everything is okay, everything is fine as long as you're not hurting anyone, as long as you are fulfilling your own self and your own destiny, then it's all good in the hood. It's all okay. Everything is fine. So what it leads to ultimately is a type of moral relativity, which again, the practitioners of New Age spirituality would say this is okay. All right. And the idea of New Age spirituality is not a new movement. It's actually a very old movement. It kept popping up in Western thought many different times. And usually what would happen would be a mixing of Christian values with occult or practitioners of magic type of beliefs. So for example, in the Enlightenment period, you had the Rosicrucians who called themselves the Order of the Rosy Cross, which they would be looking at Christian beliefs mixed with pagan Greek values. But even that didn't come out of nowhere as well. You had during the 1st century after Isa alayhi salam, after the death of Isa alayhi salam, so we're talking about like 100 AD or 100 Common Era, you'd have the Gnostic texts. Gnostics were people that called themselves knowers, the knowers of God, or people who want to get close to God, right? And there would be a mixing once again of pagan beliefs, of Greek pagan beliefs, and Christian beliefs. Even before that, you had, I mean, this can go all the way back to the Jewish people mixing beliefs of Babylonian paganism and Egyptian paganism with Jewish Tawheed beliefs to come to some very interesting conclusions about the reality of nature or the nature of reality. And you can go back as far as you want, or you can go back into modern history. But the idea of pagan beliefs and occult beliefs mixing with monotheistic religions,
Yes.
either Islam or Christianity or Judaism, as something that has always popped up in history. It keeps popping up every century or so, every couple of decades or so. Some movement around that idea keeps popping up, and usually the aqidah is the same. The aqidah, or the essential belief, can be boiled down to God is the creator, but God is also eminent in everything, meaning that everything is God and everything is one with God. So God created the tree, but he also is the tree at the same time. So in a way, it's a clever way for people who want to believe in God to negate God, right? And the idea of it is that, well, if God is eminent in everything, he's also eminent in you. So God is in you as well. So if you can remove this hijab between yourself and between God, then you can become like God, or you can be one with God, right? And some different different New Age philosophers believed in different things. So a New Age philosopher might not believe in God, but say, well, God is the collective unconscious of all of mankind, which is the belief that Carl Jung had. Even as far back as Plato, right? The Greek philosopher Plato, he would write a lot about reincarnation and books on reincarnation. This is even written in Plato's Republic. They're talking about reincarnation. How did this come about? During the time of Alexander the Great, when he conquered the Indians, he took a lot of their knowledge of reincarnation and Hinduism and mixed it again with Greek philosophy. Greek philosophers used to look at Judaism and call it the ancient religion. So this idea of mixing monotheistic religions with pagan beliefs has been a very old practice. And like I said, it keeps coming again. It came up in the Enlightenment period. It came up during American literary periods in American history, such as the Romantic movement and the Transcendentalist movement, which we can get into later. And it's coming again now as the New Age movement. And psychedelic drug culture is a very big part of New Age movement, because they believe that, well, just like a Hindu Buddhist, or a Hindu or a Buddhist or a monk will meditate for many, many hours, taking the psychedelic drug is the shortcut to doing what they're doing without having to do all that type of meditation. So you can remove that veil, or you can remove that barrier, and seek personal experiences with God. And the idea being that your religion or your point of view is based on your own personal experiences and your own visions, right? And that will get you to the conclusion that you want to be. Of course, that leads to a lot of different definitions, but there's that overarching theme of God being one or eminent in all of creation, which is a shared belief with Hinduism, and that we as human beings are able to pick and choose what religious practices we want for ourselves. And the third thing being, it's a highly subjective, highly personal thing that you can choose what you want for yourself. So I would say that's a very long overview of what New Age spirituality is.
It's interesting because with regards to that point, I don't want to take it off that point, but it's tied together. We had a comment, one of the videos some time back, talking about how exactly what you're saying, but they even went further. They're mentioning how, you know, that for thousands of years, shamanists have used psychedelics, shamanists have used certain drugs, they have looked in the world in a certain way. And is it so far-fetched that religion could have come out from that as a seed? So what I'm saying is that what they were saying, paraphrasing obviously what they're saying because it's quite a long comment, is that the roots of organized monotheistic religion comes from these polytheistic pagan type of rituals, pagan type of ideas. That's a very interesting thing to mention, that it's connected to what you're saying, but I think it goes even a step further. What do you think exactly of that?
So because they follow shaitan, the kuffar come up with the parallel belief structure So they can fit everything into that parallel belief structure. So we obviously believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam alayhi salam. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam alayhi salam, everything after that is that we devolved, right? We had monotheism and then we lost it and became polytheist, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kept sending messengers. They believe the opposite, and they many times try and fit the narrative to fit that, right? So the idea being is that this is a very old belief that paganism or polytheistic religions is what gave birth to monotheistic religions. And then they're unable to see that it could be the opposite. So we understand that even...
Exactly. Sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
even in the comment, it was mentioned that shamanism is a very, very, very old religion. Again, working on the assumption that monotheism came much later, that it was not there from the beginning. Well, according to Islamic belief. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullah alayhi, he writes in one of his books that amongst the abilities of the jinn that scholars talk about is that jinn can possess plants, not just human beings, but plants and animals, and they can tell, the plant can talk to someone and say, eat me, I have beneficial properties, or do this, I have beneficial properties. So where I'm going with this is that, for example, you have these shamans in the Amazon rainforest, and you hear about Joe Rogan, all these people going to the Amazon rainforest and doing ayahuasca with the tribes. When they ask these tribes, how did you know that mixing this specific plant with that specific plant, because it's not, because DMT doesn't last in your body for a long time, you need an inhibitor as well to keep it from being used up by your body quickly. So to keep the DMT experience going for as long as possible, or the ayahuasca experience going for as long as possible, you need to mix certain chemicals or certain plants together. So they asked, how did you know to do that? And they said, the plants told us, right?
That's
so
great.
that idea being that shamans working with jinn want to experience what they didn't call them jinn, they called them gods, the world of the gods, right? So they want to experience the world with the gods, become one with the gods. Of course, most of these cultures believe in one creator, but then they believe in many different gods and goddesses at the same time. In Hinduism, for example, they call them devatas, right? So if you have the most ancient religion in the world, Hinduism, and Hinduism is not really a religion so much as it is an amalgamation of many different religions, right? But you have the most ancient, quote unquote, religion, let's just call it religion for want of a better term, believing that there's one God. And then you have the devatas and these different gods and goddesses and demons and so forth. So even the most ancient religion in the world has a concept of one creator, right? But it got mixed in with all of this other stuff. So I would ask a question. What comes more naturally, believing that there's multiple gods and goddesses, or believing that there is a creator? I would argue that believing that there's a creator comes first, and then after you believe that there's a creator, logically you can add different creators for each thing. So it would make sense that the first thing is that people believe that there was one creator and then added on the other creators afterwards. This follows logically. You don't have a kid saying, this is a god, this is a god, this is a god, this is a god. It becomes one god, and then after that, okay, well, let's add this god here, let's add that god there, and that god over there. So I would argue that monotheism came first, especially when you look at the most ancient religions. Like Hinduism is the most ancient religion. I don't think anything goes back further than that. It itself has a concept of monotheism in it. That's that. And one more thing, Hinduisms themselves take offense at when you call them pagans. They don't believe that they're pagans. They believe that they're monotheists.
So
This
is very interesting. But I mean, I would give them right for their way of thinking, because Orthodox people, I don't know if you're aware of them, coming from Egypt, you must have come across some Copts. I mean, Orthodox people, for example, like Greeks and Serbs and Russians and Ethiopians and so on, they actually also believe that they're monotheistic, that they believe in one God, but they do have thousands of saints who are celebrated on a daily basis, 2, 3, 4 of them on a daily basis. And even if you go to the underground in Athens, for example, you will see today is the day of Saint Thomas, Saint Andrew. Yes. So this is absolutely crazy. So what you're saying, like, it fits actually very nicely. Plus, the other thing, you mentioned something very important, I find. I've had discussions with people who were open to Sufism. And when you mentioned the issue of becoming one with God, that reminded me actually of the Sufi belief in general. The whirling dervishes, for example, in Turkey, they are whirling because they want to become one with God, right? Isn't it the idea of, spiritually becoming God, one with God, becoming God himself? Isn't this
Yeah.
all the same shirky idea that you just actually mentioned about all the others and all the pagan? So doesn't this bring them closer to paganism than to Islam?
Unfortunately, and I don't want to throw my Sufi brothers and sisters under the bus. Unfortunately, though, many Sufi practices have their origins in Hindu religions and Hindu ideology. Even the Lata'if. So there's called, and I was in a Sufi tariqah for some time before I left it, right? They call them Lata'if. Lata'if are positions in the heart, right? This is very similar to the chakra systems in Buddhism and Hinduism. And even the chakra systems in Buddhism and Hinduism are not aligned. Even the idea of Kundalini yoga is not agreed upon in Hinduist scripture. Some Hindus believe that there's 3 kundalinis across the spine. Some believe in only 1 at the base of the spine. So there's always a difference of opinion. Some Sufi groups believed in 6 lata'if in the chest. Others believed in 5 lata'if in the chest, and so forth, right? But a lot of these origins are in Hinduism and Buddhism. And then you also have Christian monks. So, for example, Anthony the Great. Anthony the Great was one of the main Christian, and he's written about in Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. But
Yeah.
he wrote about Anthony the Monk, or Anthony the Great. And Anthony the Great is a figure in both Western and Eastern monastic orders. Monks from both, which is very interesting, from Coptic, from Greek Orthodox to even Western literature and Western religion looks at Anthony the Monk as a great figure. And what's Anthony the Monk described as doing? Being in the mountains for a long time, standing on one leg for a very long period of time. These are all practices that Hindu yogis did. So unfortunately, you have this type of mixing of shamanism and mainly Hinduism and Buddhism, Hinduist beliefs. I don't even want to say Buddhism because Buddhism is way later. Hindu beliefs mixing in with religious beliefs, right? As early as the Greeks, they started doing this, right? And then some people would argue that it came from ancient Egypt and not from Hinduism. This is like a different scholarly debate, but most of these people would look at, and I've spoken to some, and how people have to understand Sufism is type of like it's like layers, right? From very extreme to as orthodox as possible, right? So even some of the orthodox groups, they will have practices that the Prophet ﷺ never did, and they'll argue that it's fine, right? And I know this because I've talked with Sufism before extensively about these matters, and they redefine bid'ah in a way that gives a scope. And some Sufi groups, and some Sufi groups though will try and say, will our practice change back to the Prophet ﷺ?
Right.
But in reality, it doesn't really chain back to the Prophet ﷺ. When you look at the chain will hit someone who had a dream of the Prophet ﷺ. And that's how they justify it that way. And they say, well, this so-and-so is a great Sufi master or a saint or so forth. Therefore, this practice we okay it, right? And even some Sufi groups will look at the whirling dervishes and say, well, that's shirky. We're not doing that, But the ideology behind how they got to these extra practices are generally speaking one and the same. Some Sufi master from a long time ago had a dream, something like this, which... Yeah.
Wow. You mentioned as well with regards to that, you mentioned how the Hindu beliefs, the Hindu systems, the Hindu practices as well somehow mixed in.
So for example,
later on.
For example,
before you can, I just wanted to ask with regards to that as well. Is then how does you haven't not just in the US, all over the Western world, you have this people leaving Christianity for more of a pagan outlook, for the atheist way, and then they move towards more of the the Germanic beliefs, the Nordic folklore, the water signs, horoscopes, moon signs, and all of these different types of things that origin from pagan beliefs, pagan ideas.
Germanic people, basically what you said. So going back to the Germanic gods.
Exactly.
I've seen Greeks actually going around the temple of the Acropolis, But, yes, I couldn't believe it. But go on, Yasser. Sorry, yes.
Yeah, how does the Hindu beliefs and the Hindu influence come into play with all of that as well? And why is it that the case? And how? Sorry, these are a lot of questions, but how does that affect the Muslim youth? Affect the Muslims as well?
Okay, so the haqq is one, the batil is many. There's much falsehood. But essentially that falsehood belief that I could say is the connecting line between all of these other beliefs and all of these false religions is the fact that God is one with everything. If you can say God is one with everything, then it logically follows that a human being can be one with God, right? So I'm not trying to make fun of any of my Muslim brothers and sisters, but in terms of aqidah, right? Historically, any group that believe that God is one with everything, or God is eminent in his creation, or God is infinite and inside of everything, then the logical sequence to that is saying that you can also be one with God. That's the logical sequence. That's how it always has happened. So what the shamans do, or what different shamans from different religions do, they have different practices. It doesn't matter what the practice is. It could be eating a mushroom. It could be eating a cactus. It could be standing on one leg. It could be doing weird breathing techniques. It could be just straight up black magic and sitting in a cemetery and eating dead bodies or whatever. And there's some extreme groups that did this. The idea was that you remove the veil between yourself and the spirit world or the gods, and you become one with God, or become one with the gods, and you can communicate with them and so forth. And that idea is different from culture to culture. So the actual practice is different from culture to culture, but the intent is the same, right? And scholars write about this. Different jinns of different area want you to do different things for them, right? So
They have
magic will
different
look a little,
tastes.
yeah, different
They're-
taste based on the culture, but the outcome is the same for the shaman, right? To become one with the gods and to communicate with them, right? And again, even Native Americans believed in the Great Spirit. So most of these cultures believed in some type of creator deity or chief deity, right? And
I
then
mean, the
from
best
there,
examples, Native Americans, subhanAllah, you mentioned Native Americans,
yeah.
very close to Central Asian and Asian beliefs, actually.
Mhm.
We should not forget that the continents were once, right? So Asia and America. So absolutely. And shamanism, subhanAllah, don't forget again, Turkish people of nowadays, for example, they trace their roots back to Central Asia, back to shamanism. And if you look at Turks who don't practice the deen, who are many, unfortunately, you see actually that what they accept instead of that is actually a kind of shamanist understanding of the world, which goes back to their Central Asian ancestors, and they're proud of it. They tell you, yeah, well, before Genghis Khan, actually, before the Mongols, we had this belief, we are Turks, and this is crazy. I mean, all this makes so much sense, what you're saying just now. Honestly, it makes so much sense.
Most historians will say that the whirling dervish, the whirling practice, which actually mimics some type of whirling of the constellations, they say that originated from shamanism of that area. So even most historians will say this is originated from shamanism. So that
Very,
is
this is very, very interesting. That's crazy. And I find that interesting in the sense that the jinn themselves have different personalities, in the sense that they also have different tastes, then depending on the region, the area, the culture as well, which then brings forward different practices, which is very, very interesting as a perspective that is not looked into. It's not thought of because it's too fantastical. But then also you mentioned that the idea, so the foundational idea is breaking through the veil. It's becoming one with what they think is the realm of the gods, what they think is the realm of God, and being able to communicate with a superior being which they think is God. So
yes.
I've watched one of your videos, very interesting, and many other videos about stories with regards to DMT and psychedelics and seeing beings and experiencing things that would make people feel like they, for example, spoken to a god, or that they've broken through the veil. And Islamically seen, as we know, this breaking through the veil, or this experiencing this type of world, really only happens once death arrives, once death hits you, when you are in the barzakh, when you are on the day of judgment, those kind of things. So how does that all play into it? Same with again, to throw in there, you talk a little bit about the UFO and UFO sightings. How do they all connect? How does that play a role with the New Age movement? And why is this so important to talk about for the Muslims, and why is it important for the Muslims to know about today?
So for the barzakh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us through the Prophet Muhammad that the barzakh is the place where souls reside after they are dead, right? Between now and the day of judgment. The barzakh is not where the jinn reside. The jinn reside here, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created them from smokeless fire, and they can see us, but we cannot see them. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ also told us that after the prophets passed away, there will be no prophecy except one part of prophecy, which is dreams. So a Muslim can have a dream where he sees a prophet, or a dream where he gets something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there are uh, uh, qualifiers to that. It's not just some dude sees a dream of Prophet Muhammad and no, listen, that's not how it works, and that's not how it is. The Sahaba, when someone came to them with a dream from the Prophet Muhammad, they would ask, well, what did the Prophet look like? Has to look like the Prophet Muhammad, because the Prophet Muhammad says, he who has seen me in a dream has indeed seen me. Some scholars even said that that only applies to the Sahaba, although I don't buy that opinion, because the Sahaba asked people who hadn't seen the Prophet Muhammad, or the Tabi'in asked people who hadn't seen the Prophet Muhammad, well, describe him to me. How did he look like in the dream? So then you have some people who will say that they saw a dream of the Prophet Muhammad, but it doesn't look like the Prophet Muhammad, doesn't have his characteristics, doesn't have his features, and so forth, right? They just think that they saw something. So I just wanted to get that part out of the way, because Muslims, we are human beings too. We want that connection with the spiritual that's direct. And we want to feel like we're close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And psychedelic drugs gives an approximation of that, which is a false approximation, but it still gives some type of feeling. There's a certain euphoria that comes with the psychedelic drugs. There's a certain feeling of awe that comes with the psychedelic drugs, because they're connecting with something that they've never seen before, right? So I just want to get that part out of the way. The jinn don't live in barzakh. The jinn live here. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created them in a way that we cannot see them, but they can see us. The second part is that the jinn can come in different forms, right? So there is a hadith where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu tells Khalid bin Walid, this is after Fath al-Makkah. After Fath Makkah, Khalid bin Walid is ordered to destroy some of the pagan statues. And I forget which statue it was. It was Allat or Manat al-Uzza. I think it was Allat. He destroys the statue. Yeah, he destroys the statue. He kills the priest that's there, and he comes back and he tells Prophet Muhammad, I destroyed the statue. I killed him. He's like, the Prophet Muhammad says, go back. So he goes back and he sees some bald, dark-skinned woman screaming and pouring dust on herself. He kills that woman too. And he comes back, and the Prophet Muhammad says, now you have now you have done it, or now you have killed it. Or kama qal, right? And some of the Mufassirin say that that was a jinn that was occupying that statue that Khalid killed. We have the story of Umar capturing a jinn, right? And the jinn telling Umar, well, I'll tell you that if you say Ayat al-Kursi, and it was shaitan, if you say Ayat al-Kursi, it'll protect you from me. And the Prophet Muhammad sadaqa wa huwa kadhub, or sadaqa wa huwa kadhib. He told the truth, but indeed he is a liar. So this idea that there are limited interactions between the human world and the jinn world that can happen, that has happened, that has been recorded in hadiths, and the Prophet Muhammad told us how to deal with it, as well as certain places to avoid. For example, when we're traveling and we see ancient ruins, don't go into the ancient ruins because that's where jinn live, or don't go into heavily forested areas by yourself because that's also where jinn can reside. Things like this, the Prophet Muhammad has told us about. Can you remind me the second part of your question? Because I forgot where I was going here.
Yes, the second part of it. Let me try and remember as well.
It's a lot for my brain to hold on to.
I know it was. I was so into your answer that
many questions.
It was.
You also mentioned the UFO phenomenon.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the UFO. So
it was. Before
yeah.
you go into, I mentioned the psychedelics and the UFO and how they're connected, how the jinns play a role there as well.
Yes.
Before you go into it, let's could you give us a breakdown, because you had mentioned the DMT doesn't stay long in your system. Could you give us a breakdown of what that is and how it's used and the influence of it now?
Thank you, because DMT, I would need it. I would need it indeed. Yes, please. Yes.
DMT is dimethyltryptamine. It's a synthetic substance that has I forget who is the one who did it. My other friend Khalil Sin, who's on my videos, he's more of an expert on the chemical nature of it, right? But from my research, they tried to mimic the effect of some of the other natural psychedelic drugs that take place. So the original psychedelic drugs that people took were a type of cactus called peyote, ayahuasca, which is the one that's found in the South Americas. Peyote was found in the North Americas. You had something called baby woodrose seeds. You have mushrooms. You have a type of mushrooms that were in North America as well. And then you have different psychedelic drugs in different areas. And for example, in the Middle East, hashish was a big one. Taking hashish in liquid form, and a lot of it in liquid form, was one way that people would try to experience that psychedelic thing. In India, bhang or a type of weed. They called it bongo in Egypt. Bong in India was taken. Snake venom could be taken as well. So the goal was the same, but the tool is going to be different. So the toad venom in Europe, right? So these different types of concoctions, depending on where they were in the world, it'd be a different concoction based on the plants in the region, and the idea being that that would put you in an altered state of consciousness. And yeah, going to the aliens thing, you have different authors such as Jacques Vallée and Joseph Keel and many of these type of readers who they're not Muslim, by the way, they're atheist, but they realized when they were looking at the UFO contactee experience, it was very, very similar to a spiritual experience from these different things. So someone seeing the spirit of a goddess come to them, or someone seeing the spirit of the dead come to them, the pattern of behavior, including sometimes the messages itself, would be extremely similar to the UFO contact experience. So they said this is one and the same phenomenon. And some people even went to the conclusion, without even knowing that jinn can transform their shape and so forth, they said that this must be the same beings coming in just in a different form, depending on the culture or the region of the time. And people wrote that with the UFO experience, we are seeing the birth real time of modern folklore, right? That matches the.
Does that mean basically, brother, if you're saying that, if I understood it correctly, UFOs and so-called aliens and all the stuff that people see is nothing else but jinn work and nothing else but the same?
It's the same thing, and there's even studies that show that in a region, if people see UFO experiences and you chart it with people seeing ghosts or whatever, or any paranormal experience, the chart will look the same. So the more people see UFOs, the more people in the same area will see other paranormal experiences, just ghosts and so forth, right? So they charted off and they realized that there's a similarity, and the pattern will usually be the same, right? The pattern of experience, even including up to the messaging. So for example, even people who research DMT now, so you have studies that go over thousands of DMT users and their experiences, what the DMT entities look like, what the DMT entities told them, right? The messages, and they realize, hey, this is almost exactly the same as people saying that this is the UFO experience. So some people who don't believe in jinns and don't believe in God and so forth said, well, DMT is made in the brain naturally, so maybe these people who experience these UFO phenomenon were experiencing some type of natural endogenous DMT brain dump, and that's why it came off in that way.
Okay, very interesting. Very, very interesting. Yes, you had mentioned that in your video. Well, in one of the videos you had uploaded, we're following the John Hopkins study with regards to the many different people who went through.
There have been more studies since then, basically saying the same thing.
MashaAllah, that's very interesting. Then the important question here is, how does that, well, that relates to the New Age movement in the sense that people will try and get these experiences because they believe that this is a way to break through the veil and reach, the realm of gods or whatever idea that they have in their head. But the point is oneness, to become one with whatever is there. That's the relation to the New Age spiritualism. But then why should Muslims know about this? How does this affect Muslims? Why should Muslim parents have an idea about this? And how does this attract Muslim youngsters towards it?
Did you have a question too, by the way? I think I'll get yours, but I think you wanted to say something too.
Well, yeah, very close to, my question would have been very close to that. I was just thinking further. When all these things are what you just mentioned, I'm thinking of these near-death experiences. I mean, we know, I've read a book, for example, that time before I became Muslim, I think even, about people who actually had these near-death experiences. They were lying on the surgeon table and they could see themselves from up there, and they had been out of the body for a while, come back again. Isn't that something similar, or is it something totally different here now? I mean, is there a connection? What do you think?
See, I haven't researched as much about near-death experiences, but it does seem like there is some type of similarity, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. I would say that the reason people should watch out for all of this stuff is because in general, the pattern that I've noticed is that the first thing is the first part of the pattern is the most dangerous part of the pattern. It's positive realizations about the self. Usually people who take this will realize that, wow, this drug actually helped me. I have seen my thing from a different perspective now. I've seen that my anger issues cause me lots of problems. I have quit smoking cigarettes. I have some very profound positive experience in their life. This type of thing creates buy-in. So people want to do more of the psychedelic drugs. So generally speaking, the first experience is usually going to be some type of positive experience or some type of positive realization. I mean, and you can look at stories online and so forth. People will say, oh, you know, I saw like some Native American shaman pulling like black things out of my brain. And those black things, he said, were my addiction to cigarettes. And after that, I didn't smoke cigarettes anymore. Or someone saying like, hey, you know, I realized I was being a jerk to my wife and now I'm more calm. And the psychedelic drugs helped me realize these things about my past and, you know, all of that, right? So generally speaking, most drug experiences will give positive realizations about the self, especially psychedelic drugs. We're speaking about psychedelic drugs now.
Yeah. Yeah.
The second thing is, once you have buy-in, people are doing this more, there's a type of unhinging from reality that starts to happen, right? And that type of unhinging from reality will happen because they're taking it more now. So now they're trusting the subjective experiences that the drugs are giving them, right? So if they say, for example, you know, I took these drugs a lot, I have positive experiences. Well, now it's this drug, and under the influence of drug, I'm seeing that I only believed in Islam because of my parents. So I'm not going to be a Muslim anymore. And it continues on in this way. And the final point is moral relativity. Not the final point, actually. The point before the final point is moral relativity. So unhinges you from your beliefs. You start having moral relativity. And the final point is the more people take it, the longer term people take psychedelic drugs, the more unhinged they become from reality. Most cult movements start off with the starting point of the positive psychedelic drugs, end up someplace completely different. I just made a video refuting someone who believed that we live in a simulation. Like he actually believes we live in a simulation like the Matrix, right? So someone will believe, whether someone believes, oh, hey, we live in a simulation, this is what I found out under the influence of DMT, we live in a simulation, or religion doesn't exist, or it's all the same, or God is one with everything. What that's doing is removing objective reality. It's removing your connection to reality. This is stage 2. Then stage 3 becomes you become unhinged, right? So psychedelic drugs, through the positive experience, creates buy-in with people. They start to believe in some type of unhinging from reality type of belief, no matter what it is, right? And then finally, you have a moral relativity where everything is okay. If it's morally relative, good and evil and bad and good, they're all the same, then it starts to get really crazy. Once you get to that moral relativity, starts to get really crazy. People think that the psychedelic drugs is positive and it's only going to lead to positivity in a better world, not realizing that the Aztecs who sacrificed human beings and ate them and put their hearts in statues also did psychedelic drugs and were under the influence, and the shamans did all the same things that these new age people are talking about. But so the end point is a very dark end point. But the beginning of the funnel is very positive. And I've seen this with my own 2 eyes. I've seen someone say, you know, I realized he's not Muslim, right? This was my old Brazilian jiu-jitsu instructor. He's not Muslim. He was taking psychedelic drugs. He said, yeah, I realized that this is my son, even though my wife had him out of wedlock. He's still my son. I'm going to treat him like my son. I love him. Fast forward 3 years later, he thinks he's God, you know? I talked to someone who's Muslim saying, yeah, you know, I'm part of this Sufi tariqa now. We fast every single day. I tell him, ya akhi, you're only supposed to fast. The maximum you can fast based on the hadith of the Prophet is 1 day on, 1 day off. He's like, no, but this is an exception. This man, he's amazing. I'm part of a different Sufi tariqa now. And my belief now is love. I'm no longer a Muslim. Everything is so the unhinging from reality takes years, right? But it starts with that very, very positive realization of the self. People start realizing things that actually improve their lives. But then the second layer of that is a type of introduction of an unhinging from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Flat earthers
Extremely important what you're saying. No, I really would like to stress this one. It's extremely important what you're just saying. So because many people have said, I've heard them also saying, and this makes also sense what you're saying now, that actually it's positive. I don't see any negative. There is nothing bad about it, brother. I'm still a Muslim. I still believe in everything. It just makes me a better person. It helps me to become a better person, and it helps me to become a better Muslim, even many people say.
Just watch a Mufti Abu Layth video, and you'll see that's your end point, you know.
Okay,
we know,
okay.
we know, yes,
Okay.
we know.
Okay, we mentioned the name I don't want to mention, but okay,
yes.
anyway.
You can edit it out of the video if you want to. The point is that, like, these people, right, they think it's positive, but this is just like people who used to smoke weed in the past. And I did a video on this a long time. One of my most viral videos was in quitting marijuana. People who smoke marijuana always in the beginning will be like, this is amazing, it's positive, you don't know what they're talking about. They defend it with all their might. And the people who watch my video have been smoking marijuana for decades will say, it's so bad for you. I can't believe I wasted my life on this. This is terrible habit. So the problem with psychedelic drugs and marijuana precisely is that it's not like cocaine. It's not like alcohol. Psychedelics and marijuana, these are slow burn. It takes years to get to the end point. But when you're finally at the end point, it's too late.
It's too late.
Except whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saves.
Yes, I would like to ask you on that point, because remember we had discussed before the recording, we had discussed about something you mentioned. You mentioned a cultural shift. Now, before you go into the idea of the cultural shift you were speaking about, I wanted to ask as well with regards to that is this cultural shift that you mentioned that's happening. Is that an easier access to psychedelics, to things like DMT for the masses of people, or is it something else?
They're looking at legalizing psychedelic drugs right now as we speak. They've already legalized it for research with people who have depression and so forth, and it's going to work because, like I said, you take a little bit of psychedelic drugs, it'll usually lead to a positive experience. So the person who's depressed is going to experience positivity, and their depression will lower. I'm calling this from way far away. Once they see it's positive, they're going to say, well, we should legalize it then because it's clearly positive. And only people who have discernment will say this is a branch of magic. It's literally a branch of magic. It might take years, but we'll have people who have psychotic illnesses from this. We'll have people who develop schizophrenia from this. We'll have people who and we'll have people who seem fine on the outside. But the main thing that these things will do is it will shift the mindset into a kufr mindset, into a man is God type of mindset. It's a very fast forward way to get people to accept liberal ideology.
Yeah.
So exactly. I mean, that's
because already the idea that's, sorry to interrupt, but the idea that's going around is that we can do whatever we want. Man is God. That's actually the idea.
Yeah, I mean, Nietzsche said that. Nietzsche said that.
Yeah.
So
these things will embed it. It's like it's already there, but it's not strong. It's not. People are walking on the street. They don't necessarily believe that. And with these things, it's more. It will be a time where the random person walking on the street certainly believes it.
Yes. So it's an atheistic belief now. It's an intellectual belief now. Now it needs a spiritual component, and this is the spiritual component now.
So it would tie together with the whole liberalist idea. Actually, what we're seeing now around us, their religion being liberalism, connecting it with all this would make it actually ideal, because then you have the spiritual effect as well. So next to the political liberalism, next to democracy and all this isms that we have around us, we actually have now the spiritual aspect as well. It makes you feel better. It makes you feel connected to God. It makes you feel connected to some higher being, right? So you are a liberal LGBTQ follower. You have this as well. So you have everything you need in life, basically. Nothing is missing. So you don't need to be a religious or a pious person. You don't need to be a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian or a Hindu or whatever. You are actually a good person already, right?
These things will be simply identity markers. That's their plan. And when I say they, I don't want to say who they is, but that's their plan, is to make religion an identity. I'm Muslim, that's my identity. But my inner belief, right, is this liberal, psychedelic drugs, personal experience, subjective experience type of thing. That is what they want. It's an extreme pushing of kufr. And even if you look at occult societies like the Freemasons and so forth, how they survived, they had what was called an exoteric framework and an esoteric belief.
Yes,
In
yeah.
Islam, the scholars who refuted these groups called them the Batiniyya. The Batiniyya are the esotericists, right? So they would say, well, outside, I am Christian. But inwardly, my belief is this occult practices, our perennialism, and I interpret Islam through that lens. So their
Right.
tafsir of Islam is through that perennialist occult lens, right? Through the symbolic interpretation of everything. Or they'll say, I'm a Christian. But esoteric, that's their exoteric framework, like an exoskeleton. Their esoteric framework, their inner framework is that batiniya, interpreting things through those symbols and through those things. So they won't accept the tafsir of scholars. They'll accept the tafsir of the religion
Yes,
through that
exactly,
occult
yes.
movement that they're part of.
We're not too far. We're not too far off there. I mean, a Christian society is basically exactly that. When somebody says nowadays is Christian, I mean, what they mean with being Christian doesn't mean that they believe in God and in Jesus and they believe in the Bible. That means just simply exactly what
Identity
you just said.
marker, yeah.
You know,
Identity, yeah.
subhanallah, is absolutely crazy. I have some comments I would like to read out to you because I really think that you need to, and you mentioned the person's name before, whom I don't want to mention again, who actually, some of these comments are taken from. And I think it's extremely important because these people call themselves Muslims and they've said some crazy things. Now, for example, I say this as a Muslim. Plant medicines are far from superior in benefit and utility than Islam could ever be. It's highly insensitive to make a video disparaging people who are suffering from serious mental health conditions, who need the efficacious intervention that these medicines undeniably provide. Taking DMT has made many atheists believe in God and be better people. Saying DMT is categorically evil and from the shaitan is just ignorant. Both of them come back to what you just said. You just said exactly that, right? So, hey, listen, I'm a Muslim, man. I've become a better person. So you're telling me now it's from shaitan. What are you talking about? I've become a better Muslim. And actually, I'm a much better person now. I know people have taken them. They are better people now. So what are you saying there, right?
So with the studies that shows that, like, I think 1/3 or half of atheists, some very high number, when they take psychedelic drugs, believe that there's some kind of higher power. But again, people under psychedelics and people in these shamanic movements that use psychedelics, how do they define God? They define God, or I would say they redefine God as being one with everything. So your belief of God is not the same belief of God that will take you to paradise. It's the type of belief in God where you negate God and you're going to take yourself into mental instability, which is why people who do too much psychedelic drugs are mentally unstable, almost always. Even Hindus write about this in their scripture, that someone who's mentally ill is one with the gods. And people would actually go to a crazy person and call them a pir and call them a sheikh and ask them for help with things, because they believe that his mental illness was a sign that he was actually one with the gods. So mental illness was seen as something like that. And this is written in history books. Even certain European travelers to the Ottoman Empire at the very, very late stages of the Ottoman Empire said that some Muslims in certain areas did that. Although whether they were saying that earnestly or whether they were saying that just to kind of make fun of the Muslims because they didn't like them, Allah alam. But this is a practice that we see in multiple different cultures. So the idea that it got them to believe in God or made them be better people, I would say this is exactly what people who smoke weed say, right? It takes decades for people to realize that, hey, these are identity changing drugs. It's changed my identity. And maybe I got something positive out of it, but where I am now is a very bad place. At what cost, right? So it's, for example, imagine someone, and this is the best, if someone is on these drugs and is watching this, here's the best example I can give. Imagine you have let's say you're a man or you're a woman even. Your partner, the opposite gender, hopefully, the opposite gender is the opposite gender is amazing, but they're abusive, right? And through your relationship, you came to realizations about yourself, and you came to some positive realizations about the self. You've improved as a person, but the relationship is too much for you to handle. It's wearing you down. The person's abusive. They're gaslighting you. They're manipulating you. You can't just, whoever stays in that relationship is in denial. At some point, they're going to have to say, look, I got some positive things out of my relationship with the other person, but it's time to leave now. right?
Yeah.
So these people who got positive experiences and are unwilling to leave because of the positive experience, despite the mental instability and the increasing dark path that they go to and they keep doing these drugs, is just like the abused person in an abused person in an abusive relationship. They're unwilling to see that the partner is an abuser. It's very, very, very difficult to get them out of it because all they remember is the positive and they refuse to see the negative.
Do you know, maybe personally or because of experience or having read
I
something?
have a friend who was in the who ended up. I have two friends actually who
Yes,
ended up in the mental hospital for
that was my
smoking too much
question. Do
weed.
you know somebody? That was my
I know
question.
many people. I'm intimately familiar with the drug culture and all of that. I'm intimately familiar with that. I have two friends who ended up in a psychiatric hospital because of overdoing it. They just smoked so much weed, right? And some people will listen and say, yeah, well, they smoked too much or they did too much psychedelic drugs. And my response to them is saying, yes, they did do too much, but the nature of the drug itself
Yeah,
causes this.
takes you
The
to that.
nature of it itself takes you there. It's only a matter of time, right? So even people who don't end up in the mental facility will end up with some beliefs that unhinge them from reality and make them believe in moral subjectivity. Once you, on a mass scale, introduce moral subjectivity to society, that's it. It's all over. You can introduce any type of degeneracy to a society. Who knows if everyone like everyone today takes psychedelic drugs and say, yeah, we love each other. Everyone is the same. We're all one and the same. We all love each other. We all love each other. And then 100 years down the road, they're sacrificing humans and they're reviving the Aztec culture because it was all one and the same. They don't realize that once you introduce moral relativity, it's all over. It's only a matter of time before your society goes to a very dark place. But they're not seeing the end goal. They're only seeing the here and now and the positive aspects of the drug that they experience.
Well, love is love, isn't it? Love
Yeah,
is
love.
love. So in the end, I don't know.
And that's actually something that the DMT
Same thing, right?
told people. They said love is the answer to everything. Love is the answer to all of your problems. Even people who had alien experience. Why isn't if there actually were aliens from outer space coming to visit us? Why on earth are they telling people love is the answer and love is that? It doesn't make sense. Like this is not what an alien would want from us, right? So people are having these experiences. This is an alien. This is a DMT entity or whatever. And they're getting weird things like love is the answer to everything, love is everything. And when you look at Hinduism, for example, all religions are the same. They absorb every religion into themselves. So the belief in reincarnation, the belief that people can become one with God or people can evolve into a higher level. So what these entities would say in these studies, right? People record what the entities would say or what the aliens would say in the studies on UFO phenomenon. It's the same exact thing that very ancient religions would say too. Very same thing. So what people have is that, yeah, you're a Muslim and you're taking these drugs, but sooner or later you're about to see yourself out of Islam real soon, because you're not going to believe in Islam anymore. You're going to believe that Islam is just one aspect of the truth, and you're going to have a perennialist ideology where everything is true. Islam is just my understanding of the truth. This is my subjective understanding, which is not really objective. Islam is not objectively true. It's subjectively true for me, which is a statement of kufr that they don't realize. It's like saying that it's like saying that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ wasn't actually a true prophet. He was just true for me. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
There's some more comments. For example, I found the true meaning of Tawheed because of LSD trips. I have not been doing psychedelics since I've reverted due to work, and also I don't really need it these days. But yeah, saying that psilocybin is shaitan is just wrong. There are breakthrough studies in the last few years that have shown that psilocybin can successfully treat treatment-resistant depression. I think people forget too easily that there have been many messengers throughout history for every group of people.
That comment I already mentioned.
Identical, just a moment. The thing would not have been identical in every detail for all people and all cultures. Things forbidden in Islamic fiqh would have been permissible in other revelations, and other Islam permits forbidden. Yeah.
Yeah, that one I mentioned already. That one was the one we discussed in the beginning about, where people think the origins of monotheism is from shamanism, from these polytheistic religions. So that one, we've discussed.
I think we've addressed that like to death at this point. But just in case someone has taken psychedelic drugs and came to Islam from that, right? You got lucky. You could have easily come to any other religion. And I remember one person, he had his own problems and mental illnesses. He had converted to Islam, and he said, I met this nice lady, and she was a Hinduism, and she was doing these nice things. And he was talking about the experience like it was so profound. And I said, look, man, if are you gonna like change your religion every time something profound happens to you? So one day you're a Muslim, the next day you're Hindu, the next day you're a Christian. That's not how the truth works. Like we have our fitrah and we have our intuition, but we also have our mind too. So again, for that person who came to Islam doing psychedelic drugs, eventually what would happen is if he kept doing psychedelic drugs or she kept doing psychedelic drugs, she would see herself out of Islam. The end point, the pattern, the end point is always the same for people who take psychedelic drugs: moral relativity and a subjective reality. There's no objective truth. The longer you take it, the less you believe in an objective truth. That is simply the end point.
So your suggestion towards the end would be youngsters, Muslims, all over the world, actually, not only in the West, anywhere, right?
Yeah.
The same idea all over. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're in Turkey or if you're in Morocco or if you're in the States or if you're in Germany. In the end, the idea is the same, okay? It might give you a positive beginning, okay? It might keep you in the positive realm for a while, but actually, in the end, it can lead you to become schizophrenic. It might lead you to become basically to lose it, right? Is this
to lose it? And even if you don't lose it, the end point is always going to be subjective morality, right? And a subjective belief on the truth. No objectivity, which unhinges you from right and wrong. This is the end point.
You're right. For a Muslim who understands this one, you're absolutely right. And I would agree with that. But for a non-Muslim, it doesn't matter. They would just tell you, so what? So what if I believe that this is my God? It doesn't, it's all right. It's the same like LGBTQ, I don't harm anyone. They agree with it, so I can do whatever I want to. That's okay. It's my reality. It's my truth. I don't harm you, so I can do whatever I want to, right?
My response to those people is to say that you're harming yourself and that you matter, right? Like you matter. You shouldn't just harm yourself, right? And the idea that you can just trust these experiences or these entities is also a foolish idea, right? I don't just trust someone. They come to me, they make me feel nice, and I trust them. Where is the proof, right?
Yeah, true.
And in many of these occult movements and cult movements and psychedelic drug movements, the entities always come with some type of prediction that never comes true. They teach them some type of technology that never gets built, and the end is always the same. It's like the dunya, like you're chasing a shadow. You never actually get to where you're trying to get to, but they got what they wanted out of you: more followers, more believers. But that person who believes in them never gets to the goal that they want to achieve.
Yeah. Mr. Middlepass, Jazakallah khair, ya akhi, subhanallah. This was, I must really say,
It's very important. It's very important.
And for me, it's the first time I'm discussing that. I don't know, Yasser. I mean, I must really say that is a bit crazy. I really need to go over the interview again. I think I would have to understand really how somebody can get to that point, because honestly, it's something totally new to me. And it's something that I could not imagine in my youth. I mean, that's not something that was a problem for us. But seemingly nowadays, yeah. What can I say?
Exactly. It's one of these. This is one of the issues that has to be paid attention to by the Muslims, like many other issues. I believe that there are a couple of issues for each generation, for each half a century or century, that people focus on. They're the main issues. So in the century we're in the generation we're in, it's LGBT, as you know. It's this new age religion, as well as many other things. These are like
is one aspect of it, and we can do a part 2 on this, where we talk about transhumanism and the transhumanist philosophy and the transgender movement and all of this, and how it's connected with these pagan ideologies and the psychedelic drug movement as well. A lot of these movements are connected, right?
It's very interesting.
Yeah, even if someone says that, oh, I don't believe in that, they don't really see the historical connections between all of them.
It's very interesting because, as you mentioned that before we conclude, is that these central ideas that are focused on. And just came to my mind a thought quickly to mention is that this also seeps into academics. So I give you the academic field of history. Unfortunately, that idea is also seeping in there, in the sense that what we perceive, or what the majority of people perceive history to be, or the factual reality of history, is what it is. Doesn't matter if it's true or not. As long as people perceive it to be, it follows their ideology, it's perceived to be correct, then that's what it has, that must have been what has happened. And it's seeping in there into many other fields of study as well.
It's a war on truth, basically.
A war on truth in many ways and from many sides. And one of them, the last one, was again the movie of Cleopatra, right?
I heard about that. Yeah.
You know, that's one thing. Again, it's not the issue of being black or white. The issue is of factual reality. You know, it is the issue of what is the truth. If you watch the series of Bridgerton, by the way, which I have watched,
even the black community has their own problems now. There's like one movement in the black community. I was talking about this with a brother, where some people in America say that they're not actually black, they're Native Americans, and it's again a type of erasing of true history. You know.
Excellent. SubhanAllah, it becomes crazier and crazier. Jazakallah khair, really barakallahu fik for the interview, for your time. And well, inshallah, part 2. Why not, inshallah?
Yeah, inshallah, anytime, inshallah.